In the 1970s, America was shaking off the hangover from the turbulent 1960s, with the Vietnam War winding down and a new wave of cultural freedom crashing onto the shores of everyday life. Partying, or going out, as it was often called, became a national pastime that reflected the era's mix of optimism, excess, and a touch of escapism. Picture this: gas shortages, inflation biting at everyone's wallet, and yet, on Friday nights, folks across the country were slipping into outfits that looked like they were designed by a committee of peacocks and heading out to venues where the music pulsed like a second heartbeat. It wasn't just about getting drunk or dancing. It was a social ritual that captured the spirit of reinvention. Americans in the 70s partied with a vigor that suggested they were making up for lost time, turning nightclubs, bars, and house parties into arenas where the rules of the day job didn't apply. Of course, not everyone was twirling under a disco ball. Some were nursing beers in dive bars while debating Watergate, but the overarching vibe was one of liberation, laced with just enough hedonism to keep things interesting without tipping into outright chaos, at least most of the time. Let's start with the heartbeat of the 70s party scene: the music. Disco dominated the airwaves and dance floors, emerging from underground clubs in New York City and spreading like wildfire across the nation. It all kicked off in the early part of the decade, with roots in soul, funk, and R&B, but by 1974, it had exploded into a full-blown phenomenon. Songs like Stayin' Alive by the Bee Gees or Lou Freak by Chic weren't just tunes. They were anthems that got even the clumsiest accountant grooving. The beats were relentless, designed for non-stop movement, with DJs mixing tracks seamlessly to keep the energy high. In cities like New York, Philadelphia, and Los Angeles, discos weren't mere bars. They were temples of rhythm where people arrived around 10 p.m. and didn't leave until the sun was peeking over the skyline. Humorously enough, many a partygoer discovered that disco dancing required a level of coordination that sobriety rarely provided, leading to what some called the white man's overbite, that awkward head-bobbing move that looked more like trying to eat an invisible apple than actual dancing. But seriously, this music bridged divides. It brought together black, white, gay, straight, and everyone in between, fostering a sense of community amid the era's social upheavals. Fashion played a starring role in how Americans prepped for a night out, turning getting ready into an art form. Men sported wide lapel shirts unbuttoned to reveal chest hair that could rival a shag carpet, paired with bell-bottom pants that flared out like emergency parachutes. Women dazzled in halter tops, hot pants, or flowing maxi dresses made from shiny polyester that caught the light like a human mirror ball. Platform shoes were ubiquitous, adding inches to everyone's height and a wobble to their step that made walking to the club feel like navigating a lunar landscape. Colors were bold. Think electric blue, mustard yellow, and fiery orange, often accented with gold chains or medallions that screamed, "Look at me." It was an era when synthetic fabrics ruled, partly because they were cheap and easy to clean after a sweaty night, but also because they embodied the flashy, futuristic optimism of the time. One might chuckle at the thought of a guy in a leisure suit trying to impress a date, only to realize the suit was essentially a flammable onesie. But in truth, this attire symbolized breaking free from the conservative styles of the 50s and 60s. People invested in their looks. A trip to the salon for a blowout or perm was as essential as buying tickets to a concert. In smaller towns, the fashion might have been toned down, a flannel shirt over jeans for a bar crawl. But in urban hotspots, it was all about excess, where forgetting your platforms at home could mean social exile for the evening. The venues where these parties unfolded were as diverse as the country itself, but a few icons defined the decade. In New York City, Studio 54 stood as the pinnacle of glamour and exclusivity, opening in 1977 and quickly becoming a magnet for celebrities like Andy Warhol, Liza Minnelli, and Mick Jagger. Getting in wasn't easy. The doorman, often the infamous Mark Bennick, wielded power like a Roman emperor, cherry-picking entrants based on vibe, looks, or fame. Once inside, the scene was electric. Mirrored walls, throbbing lights, and a dance floor packed with bodies moving in unison. Cocaine was rumored to flow like confetti, and the balcony offered views of debauchery that would make your grandmother blush. But it wasn't all superficial. Studio 54 represented a melting pot where social barriers dissolved, blue-collar workers rubbed elbows with Hollywood stars, all under the spell of the music. Downtown, CBGB on the Bowery catered to a grittier crowd, birthing punk rock with bands like the Ramones and Blondie. It wasn't disco, it was raw, loud, and rebellious, with sticky floors and graffiti-covered walls. Partiers here slammed beers and mosh'd, a far cry from the polished twirls uptown, but equally emblematic of the 70s urge to defy norms. Max's Kansas City, another New York staple since the late 60s, evolved into a hub for artists, musicians, and poets, hosting everyone from David Bowie to Iggy Pop. The upstairs was for dining, the downstairs for rocking out, and the vibe was intellectual hedonism. Conversations about art interspersed with shots of whiskey. Beyond New York, the partying landscape varied by region, adding layers to the national tapestry. In Los Angeles, the Sunset Strip pulsed with rock and roll energy at places like the Whiskey A Go-Go, where doors opened to glam rockers and aspiring stars. Hollywood types partied with a flair for the dramatic, often extending nights into after-parties at mansions in the hills. San Francisco, still echoing the hippie ethos, blended disco with remnants of the Summer of Love. Clubs like the I-Beam attracted a vibrant gay scene, where the sexual revolution was in full swing. The Castro District's bars and discos were safe havens for LGBTQ+ individuals, fostering communities amid ongoing struggles for rights. In the Midwest, say Chicago or Detroit, partying leaned toward house parties or neighborhood bars, where Motown influences lingered and folks danced to soulful grooves in basements lit by lava lamps. Southern cities like Miami or Atlanta saw a fusion of Latin rhythms with disco, thanks to immigrant influences, leading to steamy nights at clubs with conga lines and rum cocktails. Even in rural areas, Americans improvised, drive-in theaters turned into impromptu dance spots, or barns hosted keggers with country rock blaring from 8-track players. The humor in this regional diversity? A New Yorker might scoff at a Midwestern bar's lack of velvet ropes, but both were chasing the same high, connection through revelry. Substances fueled much of the 70s party engine, though not without controversy. Alcohol remained king, with beer like Miller High Life or cocktails such as the Tequila Sunrise flowing freely. Bars often had happy hours that stretched into the night, encouraging patrons to loosen up. But the decade saw a surge in drug use, reflecting broader social shifts. Marijuana, decriminalized in some states by mid-decade, was commonplace at parties, passed around in joints or bongs with a casualness that would shock earlier generations. It added a mellow haze to gatherings, perfect for philosophical chats or giggling at bad jokes. Cocaine, however, became the decade's notorious darling, especially in upscale scenes. Dubbed the champagne of drugs, it was snorted in bathrooms or off album covers, providing bursts of energy for all-night dancing. Studio 54 lore is rife with tales of it being openly used, though law enforcement cracked down with Nixon's war on drugs in 1971, leading to more clandestine consumption. Quaaludes or ludes were popular for their sedative effects, often mixed with booze for a dreamy high that made dancing feel effortless, but risky, as overdoses weren't unheard of. Amphetamines kept the party going when fatigue set in. One light-hearted observation: partiers often joked that the 70s energy crisis didn't apply to nightlife, thanks to these chemical boosts. Yet, seriously, this era marked a turning point. Drug use transitioned from counterculture rebellion to mainstream recreation, prompting public health concerns and the eventual backlash in the 80s. The social dynamics of 70s partying were deeply intertwined with the sexual revolution, which reshaped how Americans interacted after dark. Birth control pills, widely available since the 60s, empowered women to explore sexuality without fear of unwanted pregnancy, leading to more open attitudes. Premarital sex, once taboo, became normalized, and parties often served as hunting grounds for hookups. Disco clubs, in particular, were arenas for flirtation, with dances like the hustle involving close contact that blurred lines between friendship and romance. The gay liberation movement, ignited by the 1969 Stonewall riots, found expression in nightlife. Venues like New York's Paradise Garage or San Francisco's bathhouses became spaces for unapologetic self-expression. Heterosexual couples experimented too. Key parties, where keys were swapped for partner exchanges, were whispered about in suburbs, though more myth than widespread reality. Feminism influenced the scene. Women asserted independence, hitting the town without male escorts, though sexism lingered in catcalls and unequal entry policies at clubs. Racial integration advanced unevenly. While disco originated in Black and Latino communities, mainstream clubs sometimes excluded minorities, sparking tensions. Humorously, the era's pickup lines were as cheesy as fondue, "What's your sign?" being a classic Zodiac-based icebreaker that rarely worked but always amused. In essence, partying facilitated social experimentation, breaking down barriers while highlighting inequalities. House parties offered a more intimate alternative to clubs, especially for those outside big cities or on tighter budgets. These gatherings often started with invitations scribbled on napkins or spread by word of mouth, evolving into all-night affairs. Hosts stocked coolers with cheap wine like Boone's Farm or cases of Pabst Blue Ribbon, and guests brought their own contributions, perhaps a Jell-O mold laced with vodka for a wobbly treat. Music came from stereos blasting vinyl records, with someone inevitably flipping sides every 20 minutes. Games like Twister or charades added interactivity, often leading to laughter and accidental entanglements. In college towns, keg stands and beer pong precursors ruled, with students cramming into apartments for theme nights. Toga parties inspired by Animal House, 1978, became legendary for their toga-clad chaos. Rural Americans might host barn dances, complete with hay bales and moonshine, blending country with rock. The charm? These parties felt personal, where conversations ranged from politics, Ford versus Carter, to pop culture, Star Wars fever in '77. A subtle joke of the time, at a '70s house party, the real danger wasn't running out of beer, but stepping on a pet rock someone left on the floor. As the decade progressed, partying reflected broader economic and cultural pressures. The 1973 oil embargo led to shorter club hours in some areas, but Americans adapted, pre-gaming at home to save on gas. Inflation meant cover charges rose, pushing more toward free-form gatherings. Television influenced the scene. Shows like Saturday Night Live, debuting in 1975, parodied nightlife, making stars out of comedians who captured the era's absurdity. Movies like Saturday Night Fever, 1977, romanticized disco, turning John Travolta's strut into a national aspiration, though real-life dancers often looked more like enthusiastic flailing than choreographed grace. Celebrity culture amplified the allure. Tabloids buzzed with stories of stars like Farrah Fawcett or Sylvester Stallone hitting the town, inspiring ordinary folks to emulate them. Yet, not all was glitter. The AIDS crisis loomed in the late '70s, though unrecognized then, casting a shadow on promiscuity. Drug overdoses claimed lives, like that of comedian John Belushi in 1982, but rooted in '70s excess. The humor in hindsight? Many survivors look back and wonder how they avoided platform shoe-induced sprains or polyester-induced heatstroke. Regional flavors added spice to the narrative. In the Southwest, like Texas or New Mexico, partying incorporated Tejano influences, with discos featuring bilingual DJs and margaritas aplenty. Florida's Miami scene blended Cuban rhythms, birthing the Miami sound, with artists like KC and the Sunshine Band. The Pacific Northwest, Rainier and more laid-back, favored rock bars where flannel-clad crowds headbanged to Led Zeppelin covers. In the Deep South, soulful juke joints persisted, where partying meant slow dancing to Al Green amid barbecue smoke. Even Alaska had its oil boom parties in the late '70s, with roughnecks celebrating paydays in makeshift saloons. This patchwork showed America's diversity. A night out in Manhattan might involve velvet ropes and VIP lounges, while in Kansas, it could be a drive to a roadhouse for line dancing and chores. The common thread? Escapism from daily grinds, stagflation, unemployment, post-Watergate cynicism, through communal joy. Toward the decade's end, cracks appeared in the party facade. The Disco Demolition Night in 1979, where a Chicago radio DJ blew up disco records at a baseball game, symbolized backlash against the genre's perceived superficiality and commercialization. Punk and new wave rose as alternatives, with clubs like CBGB championing anti-establishment vibes. Yet, the 70s legacy endured. It democratized fun, making nightlife accessible beyond elites. Women gained agency, minorities found voices, and music evolved. One might quip that the 70s taught Americans to party like tomorrow's hangover didn't exist, but in reality, it was a formative era of self-discovery. Extending the narrative, consider the role of technology in 70s partying. 8-track tapes allowed mobile music, turning cars into rolling discos for cruising. CB radios connected truckers and partiers alike, with handles like Disco Duck coordinating meetups. Lighting innovations, strobe lights, fog machines, transformed dingy basements into psychedelic wonderlands. Food at parties was simple yet iconic. Fondue pots bubbling with cheese, deviled eggs, or Jiffy Pop popcorn exploded over stoves. Desserts like Watergate salad, pistachio pudding with marshmallows, nodded to current events with a sweet twist. Beverages evolved too. Wine coolers emerged, and exotic drinks like piña coladas transported sippers to imagined tropics. Social etiquette dictated party behavior, arriving fashionably late, mingling without monopolizing, and knowing when to call a cab. Flirting was an art, often involving shared cigarettes or dances that tested chemistry. For singles, the scene was a marketplace. For couples, a test of trust amid temptations. Families sometimes partied together. Block parties with grills and games fostered community, especially in suburbs. The 70s also saw environmental awareness creep in. Some eco-conscious partiers recycled beer cans or opted for natural highs like herbal teas, though rare. Health fads like jogging contrasted with nocturnal indulgences, creating ironic lifestyles. In summation, though without formal closure, the ways Americans partied in the 1970s painted a vivid portrait of a nation in flux, vibrant, flawed, and unforgettably alive. From the glittering heights of Studio 54 to the gritty depths of CBGB, from cocaine-fueled marathons to marijuana-mellowed chats, the decade's nightlife was a mirror to societal soul-searching. It wasn't perfect, excesses led to regrets, and not everyone participated equally. But for those who did, it was a time when the night promised reinvention, one disco ball reflection at a time. And if nothing else, it proved that even in tough times, Americans could find rhythm in the chaos.